The car sank up to its axle on the dirt road. 3 vehicles passed without slowing down. The one that finally stopped came on foot, a long-handled brush over one shoulder and a bucket in hand. The man in the suit had his dress shoes buried in the mud. He'd already tried everything. Gunned the engine, cranked the wheel, got out, pushed against the door, climbed back in, gunned it again. The back tire dug in and screamed, and every time it screamed, the car sank another inch. The mud on that stretch of road up at Miller's Gap was like that. It looked solid on top and turned to butter underneath. Harlan Mercer glanced at the watch on his wrist and almost laughed at himself. He was late for a meeting he himself had scheduled, in a place he himself had chosen. And he couldn't even make it 100 yards down the road. The first vehicle that passed was a pickup from the very collection station he was on his way to visit. The driver lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a lazy salute and kept going. The second was a white panel van with lettering on the door. It did slow down. It even coasted almost to a stop. A woman in a hairnet looked out the back window, said something to whoever was up front, and the van rolled on. The third didn't even look. Harlan stood there in his tie, the cuffs of his slacks heavy with mud, understanding something the city had never bothered to teach him, that there's a certain kind of people who just drive on by. That's when the woman appeared around the bend, walking unhurried, rubber boots caked to the ankle, a bucket in one hand. In the other, resting against her shoulder, a long-handled brush, the kind used for scrubbing the inside of pipes. She stopped a few steps short of the car, looked at the wheel, looked at the trench the car had carved into the mud, then looked at him. "You gunned it too hard," she said. It wasn't a question. "I was trying to get out." "Well, you tried to get out and you dug yourself a hole. Now you've got to climb out of a hole you dug yourself." Harlan started to say something polite. He didn't. He just stood there, because the sentence had a weight to it he couldn't quite measure yet. The woman set the bucket down at the edge of the grass, leaned the long brush against the fence, and walked a slow circle around the car, checking all 4 tires the way you'd size up an animal. "You got any boards in there? Plywood, planks, anything solid?" He popped the trunk. There was a leather briefcase, a bottle of water, and an umbrella. She didn't laugh. He noticed that too and filed it away. "Wait here." She ducked under the barbed wire fence with the ease of someone who'd been doing it her whole life, and came back dragging 2 weathered planks that had been leaning against a fence post. Then she snapped a dead branch off a scrub bush at the roadside, a good armful of it, and dropped the whole load near the tire. "Now I'm going to let some air out of your tires," she said. "Let air out. Ma'am, the tire's going to go flat." "It's supposed to go flat." Harlan opened his mouth to explain that this made no sense, that a soft tire sinks worse, that it was a simple matter of traction. He had a whole fleet, trucks, trailers, men on payroll just to handle things like this. She was already crouched by the wheel, pressing her thumbnail into the valve stem. The air hissed out in a thin whistle. "A full tire's hard," she said, not looking up. "Hard digs into mud and keeps digging. Soft, it spreads out wide and rides on top. Same reason you sink walking through mud in heels but not in boots." He looked down at his own shoes, buried to the laces, and had nothing to say to that. She wedged the planks in front of the back tires, packed the dry branches underneath, scraped a channel clear with her bare hand, and stood, wiping the mud on her skirt. "Now you get in and do it my way. First gear, light foot. If the wheel starts screaming, you take your foot off right away. If it screams, that means it's spinning. A wheel that screams is digging, not moving." He climbed in, put it in gear, eased down. The car crept forward 2 feet and the tire screamed. He lifted his foot like she'd told him. She adjusted the plank a little, packed in more branches, knocked twice on the side of the car. Again, slow. "You're not in a hurry." "I am actually very much in a hurry." "Then go slower still." On the 3rd try, the car climbed up onto the plank, caught the dry brush, and rolled out of the mud hole clean, like it had never been stuck at all. Harlan pulled up onto solid ground and got out. He was mud to the elbow, his tie was crooked, and his heart was going in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He laughed out loud, alone, right there in the middle of the dirt road. The woman was already gathering the planks to lean them back against the fence post. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Adeline." "Adeline what?" Adeline who works. She propped the boards against the fence and straightened the wire. Leave it. Somebody else is going to need it. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet and peeled off some bills the way he did when he wanted to solve things fast, and held them out. Adeline looked at the money, then at him. Put that away. You lost your time on me. I lost half an hour. I've got half an hour to spare. She picked up the bucket, settled the brush handle back on her shoulder. And you didn't buy anything from me. This road isn't a job. This road is where people run into each other. She tipped her chin toward the way he was headed and started walking, boots heavy, bucket swinging, the long brush rocking on her shoulder, down the same dirt road 3 cars had already passed her on that morning. Harlan stood there until she disappeared around the bend. He got back in his mud-streaked car and drove on, slow because of the soft tires, taking the long curve the road makes at that stretch. She cut through the footpath by the hollow and got there before he did. He rolled into the Piney Ridge collection station 40 minutes late, jacket over his arm, shirt stained through. What he didn't know was that he'd just been pulled out of the mud by the one person in that whole valley who knew exactly why his cheese was bloating on the shelf, and that weeks later that same woman would be the one the whole valley pointed at on the street because her name was going to be on every wrong piece of paper and because she really had signed it. Harlan Mercer was not a man who came from nothing by accident. He'd started with an old milk truck, buying up jugs porch to porch, and now he had a plant outside Roanoke, a fleet, a brand, and his cheese on the shelves of every Sunridge Market store in 3 states. Clearwater Creamery. The name was on the label on the trucks on the side of the plant, and Clearwater had a problem nobody could explain. The cheese was bloating. Not every batch, not all the time. A run here, a run there, and always from the same source. It would land on the shelf, the packaging would swell, the store would pull it, corporate would call, and every time somebody traced it back to the same place. The milk out of Piney Ridge, the little station tucked up in the hills, where about 40 families brought their milk down every morning in steel cans, some by truck, some by mule cart, most of them just carrying it. The company lab report said contamination. The station manager blamed the farmers. The cleaning crew blamed the farmers. Sunridge Markets, which bought half the run, had sent a short warning. One more bloated batch, and the contract was off the table. Harlan had driven up personally because of that. He was giving it 2 weeks. If it wasn't fixed, he'd shut the Piney Ridge station down, buy milk from the other side of the ridge, and be done with the headache. He thought he was coming up the mountain to make a business decision. He was coming up to get mud on his shoes and hear the truth from a woman on foot, and it would be a long while yet before he put the 2 things together. The Piney Ridge station was a low whitewashed building tucked against the slope, tin roof that popped and cracked in the sun. Inside were 2 cooling tanks, a line of steel pipe running up the wall, a pump, a scale, a cheese vat, and a curing room with wooden shelves. All the milk from the whole valley came through that building. It arrived in the morning, in cans, on trucks, on muleback, in hand, was weighed, tasted, poured in. Then it ran down the line, cooled in the tank, and by late afternoon the company truck came up the mountain and hauled it all down to the plant. Adeline had worked in that building since before Clearwater ever bought the station. She showed up after the milk had already gone out, when the place was empty. That was her hour as the washing hour. Anybody who's never worked a place like that thinks washing is wiping down a counter. It isn't. Milk is fat, and fat clings to steel, and water doesn't shift it on its own. If the water runs too hot too fast, it cooks the residue right onto the wall, and it turns into a film your hand can't even feel. Her mother had taught her all of it, hands-on, in the old dairy down by the creek back when it was still taking in milk from half the county. Old man Fortner's place. Miss Alice was the rinse mistress there. It wasn't a title. Nobody wrote it on any paper. But when Fortner's cheese made a name for itself around the county, it was Alice who did the washing, and the old man knew it, and the whole valley knew it. Her mother's rules were 5. Adeline had known them by heart since she was a little girl. First, warm water right away. The second the tank's empty, never let it sit and dry. Dried milk on steel turns to stone. Second, hot soap at the right strength, and a scrub brush, a real one, put your back into it. Product doesn't scrub for you, product only helps the person who's already scrubbing. Third, Once a week, the acid wash to strip the film of milk scale your hand can't feel, but a white rag will show. Fourth, rinse until the water runs clear, no suds. If there's suds, there's still soap in there, and soap in the tank goes out with the milk. Fifth, and this was the one Miss Alice said loudest, take the elbow apart. Every milk line has a joint, a union, a gasket, a hose, and it's right there, in that little corner nobody ever looks at, that the dirt that ruins everything goes to sleep. What sleeps wet and shut wakes up spoiled, her mother used to say. So at the old dairy, the line came apart every single week. Pull the gasket, scrub the inside, lay the piece on the bench, leave the whole thing open to dry till morning. Adeline grew up watching that building sleep with its mouth open, dripping, and she grew up learning the test. The test was the finger. Run your finger down dry steel. If your finger squeaks, if it catches and makes that little sound like a fingernail on glass, the steel is clean. If your finger slides, there's grease. Clean steel sings, Miss Alice used to say. Dirty steel slides. Adeline learned that before she learned to read properly. And now at the Piney Ridge station, under a line item on the contract called Sanitation and Services, she had 40 minutes to wash the whole building. 40 minutes, because the cleaning crew's van had another station across the ridge to hit that same night, because the contract paid by the station, not the hour, and the more stations the van covered, the more its owner made. The chemical came in a big drum and was measured out by that owner himself, with a cup only he used, at a line he'd scratched in himself, and the elbow joint never came apart. Taking a pipe apart is maintenance work, Hank Pruitt had told her the first week, hand on her shoulder. Maintenance is outside our scope, not in our contract. You're cleaning crew, Adeline. You clean what's on the outside. The wrenches stayed locked in the van, Adeline argued. Argued at first, argued after, argued the way a woman who needs the paycheck argues, which is quietly, looking off to the side, and kept losing. She lost the station's own long-handled brush, which disappeared and was never replaced, because the company said the new chemical didn't need scrubbing. Then she started bringing her mother's brush from home every day, over her shoulder, and taking it back home every night. She lost the acid, which was always somehow out of stock. She lost the rinse time, which was the first thing to get cut whenever the van honked outside. And that's how, little by little, the cheese from Piney Ridge started to bloat. Nobody in the valley knew any of that. What the valley knew was something else. It had been told, and told plenty of times, that the milk from up at Piney Ridge ran dirty, that the water up at the higher farms was bad, that folks' cans were old, that people who milked sitting on a three-legged stool in a barn couldn't really be trusted to supply a big company. Every time a batch bloated down in the city, the deduction landed on the Piney Ridge payroll, and it never landed on Pruitt, never landed on the station, never landed on the pretty label. It landed on Loretta Shaw, who had 4 kids and 7 cows. It landed on Bo and Odell Combs, who'd already sold their handcart to buy mineral salt for the herd. It landed on Tate Combs, the angriest of them all and the proudest, who started showing up at the station scowling, looking at the cleaning women like he was looking at the enemy. It was one of those deductions that had brought Harlan Mercer up the mountain that morning, arriving mud to the elbow. And the first thing he did was apologize for being late. The second was look around. Otis Dale, the manager, came out first with his clipboard held to his chest. Hank Pruitt came right behind him, shirt pressed, wearing the look of a man who'd already owned that ground before anybody else showed up. "Did you get stuck in that mud hole at Miller's Gap?" Hank asked, grinning. "That stretch is a disgrace. I've complained about it 10 times. I got stuck. How'd you get out?" Harlan was about to answer, about to tell him about the woman with the bucket and the brush, ask who she was, say he wanted to thank her properly. But Hank's hand was already on his back, steering him easy toward the door of the building, and Hank's voice was already going, laying out exactly what was about to happen in the next few minutes. And Harlan went along. Inside, near the door of the washroom, 4 women in hairnets and boots stood waiting for the visit to pass. Judy was one of them, Cleo another, Yvonne the third, and the 4th was Adeline. She stood there with her cap on, her apron wet, hands folded in front of her, watching that man walk in. He passed within 2 feet of her, passed looking at the tanks, at the ceiling, listening to Hank talk about output and protocol. He glanced sideways at the four women against the wall and saw no one. Adeline didn't lower her head. She just stood there, quiet, watching the man she'd pulled out of the mud walk through the building without recognizing the one face in the whole valley that had stopped for him. It didn't hurt like anger. It hurt a different way. It hurt like the moment you find out you'd gone invisible somewhere along the road and never even noticed when. That day, at the end of the visit, Harlan Mercer climbed up onto the wooden platform outside. The whole valley gathered below and said what he'd come to say. He said the bloating was everybody's problem. He said the chain had given him a deadline. He said he'd give it 2 weeks. He said if the milk kept coming in bad, the Piney Ridge station would close. A long silence sat over the yard. Tate Combs spat off to the side and looked at the women in hairnets. Loretta Shaw tightened the knot on her headscarf and said nothing because she had nothing to say. She had 7 cows and 4 kids, and that station was the only place in the world that bought her milk. Hank Pruitt climbed the platform right after, asked to be heard, and said Pruitt Sanitation and Supply was committing to a reinforced protocol with a stronger product, and that they'd also be advising the farmers on proper hygiene practices, because the root of the problem, with all due respect, started right at each farm's own gate. The valley heard that in silence. And that's why, that same afternoon, when Adeline stopped Otis Dale in the hallway and told him she knew what was really going on, he didn't even let her finish. "Adeline, honey," he said, straightening his clipboard. "You wash floors." She stood there with the sentence caught in her throat and walked home down the road by the mud hole, past the spot where the mud still held the mark of 2 planks. Otis Dale was never going to figure out on his own what was standing right in front of him. That woman who washed floors was the only living soul in that entire valley who'd learned to wash a milk line the right way. And nobody there had the faintest idea that within a few days she was going to write her own name with her own hand on the paper that would condemn her in front of everyone. Adeline's house sat on the rise near Miller's Gap, about 500 paces past the mud hole, tucked against the hillside. Whitewashed, tin roof gone thin with age, a pot of basil in a coffee can on the porch rail. Simon came home that evening, dusty from the road, smelling like sour milk the way he always did. He rode along with Abe Whitfield on the truck route, up the mountain before dawn, hauling cans down, stacking, hosing out the truck bed on the way back. He'd done that job since he left school. "Ma, the roof over my room leaked again." "I know. If it rains hard, it's going to soak the bed." "I know, baby." She knew better than he did. She was the one who got up before dawn with the wash tub when the drumming on the tin started. 14 shingles short and a piece of framing besides. She'd done the math 100 times, and it always landed in the same place, a place that didn't add up, because things got taken out of her pay before it ever reached her hand. The boots came out, the hairnet came out, the apron came out, and there was the advance she'd taken last winter, when the leak first opened up. All of it written down in a hardback ledger that Marley Pruitt, Hank's daughter, kept in careful handwriting inside the van. The Piney Ridge crew worked under Pruitt Sanitation and Supply, which meant they worked in every way that mattered, for Hank Pruitt. In the days after the owner's visit, the washroom turned into a different place. Hank showed up with a fresh drum, red cap, calling it the reinforced formula imported cure-all. He had a sign tacked up on the washroom wall with his company's name across the top and a list underneath, and he cut 10 more minutes off the schedule. "With this stuff you don't need to scrub," he said, thumping the drum. "You spray it, let it sit, hose it down. This is modern chemistry, Adeline. Scrubbing's what my mother taught me, Mr. Pruitt. Let me open that elbow joint once. Just once. Again. Once, and that's it. I open it, you look with me. If it's clean, I never bring it up again. And if it's dirty, then you'll see with your own eyes why that cheese is bloating." He laughed, a short laugh with no warmth in it at all, and his hand went back to her shoulder. "Listen to me. That man from the city gave a 2-week deadline. If somebody starts saying the problem's in here in this building, you know what happens? He shuts it down. Right then and there, and then you, me, Judy, Cleo, Yvonne, Otis Dale, everybody's out looking for work in town. And the folks who bring the milk? The milk folks find a way, they always do." Adeline looked hard at that man. "You know, don't you? You already know." He took his hand off her shoulder. "I know you wash a tank, right? Always have. That's exactly why I want you working with me. That was the first time she ever felt afraid of him. Not afraid of a slap, not afraid of shouting. Hank Pruitt never raised his voice at anybody. It was something else. It was the fear that comes over you all at once when you realize you're standing inside a room whose only door belongs to somebody else. That same week he called her out to the van. The van sat parked in the shade of a big oak by the building, side door open. Inside was a folding table, a hardback ledger, and a folder with a rubber band around it. Marley sat up front, pencil behind her ear, and gave a soft hello. "Sit down here, Adeline." She sat on the running board, hands in her lap. Hank opened the folder and pulled out a stack of forms, all identical. Printed header, ruled lines, and at the bottom of each a line for the name and a line for the signature. "Sanitation logs," he said. "The plant's requiring it now. Every wash has to have a signed log by whoever did the cleaning. No log, and as far as they're concerned, nobody cleaned a thing." "That's a good thing. That's what I've been asking for." He tapped his finger on the stack. "Here's the trouble. The crew here is you, Judy, Cleo, and Yvonne, except Cleo and Yvonne rotate over with the crew on the other side of the ridge, and that crew over there doesn't sign a thing. In and out. Vanish. One of them can barely write her own name. I sign mine. That's just it." He shifted on the bench and lowered his voice. "If a log comes back unsigned, the plant's going to say the wash never happened. And if the plant says that, I lose the contract. You lose the job, the station closes." He pushed the stack across the little table, a pen resting on top. "Sign the whole month, and I'll fill in the rest." Adeline looked at the stack without touching it. "Mr. Pruitt, there's nights I'm not the one who washes. I know that. So I'd be signing for something I never saw. You'd be signing for something that got done." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Or you think the girls don't wash? You think I send out a dirty tank on purpose?" She didn't answer. "Adeline, look at me. You're the most senior one here. You're the one who knows what she's doing. If you don't put your name on that paper, who's going to?" "Judy. Judy signs whatever I hand her without reading a word." He let the silence do some work. He knew how to do that. Then he opened the ledger, ran his finger down a column, and turned it toward her. "Your advance, right here. Roof shingles, boot deduction, the rest. You've got about 4 more months of paying that off. Sign this for me and I'll wipe it clean today. Wipe it right in front of you, and I'll even slip you a little something extra for the trouble of checking the girls' work." A dog was barking somewhere down the hollow. You could hear the tin roof of the building ticking. Adeline thought about the leak over Simon's bed, thought about the 14 shingles. She thought that she washed clean, and that if she put her own name behind that paper, maybe the others would start washing clean too, because nobody wants to dirty the name of someone they trust. That's how she talked herself into it. Not for the money, for a crooked kind of hope. She pulled the stack into her lap and wrote her name letter by letter, slow, the way her mother had taught her at the kitchen table when she was a girl with a fat pencil. Miss Alice had insisted the name come out pretty. A sloppy name. Anybody can copy, she used to say. A well-made name is yours. Adeline signed 31 sheets on that van's running board, one after another, with the care of somebody doing something important. When she finished, her hand had gone numb. Hank squared up the stack, tapped it even on the table and slid it into the folder with the rubber band. Then he picked up the ledger, wet the pencil tip on his tongue, and crossed out the advance with a single stroke. "There. Clean slate," he laughed. "Cleans your department, right, Marley?" She didn't look back once. Adeline walked home with the folded bills tucked in her bra and something cold sitting in her chest she couldn't name the whole way. She told Simon the shingle debt was wiped clean. He celebrated, talked shingles, talked framing, talked about climbing up on the roof at the end of the week. She slept bad, and what Adeline didn't know that night was that within a few days a storm was going to come down off that mountain, hard enough to turn Miller's Gap Road into a river. Nobody, not on foot, not by van, not by truck, was going to reach the station through, and that the sanitation log for that very night was already signed with her name on it. Neat, letter by letter, exactly the way her mother had taught her. In the city, in the conference room at Clearwater Creamery, there was a long dark wood table and a window that looked out over the plant yard. Harlan Mercer sat at the head of it, jacket over the back of his chair, listening to a man who hadn't come there to listen. Alton Reyes was the buyer for Sunridge Markets. He spoke quiet in the way of a man who's never had to raise his voice. "Harlan, I like you. I bought your first batch of cheese back when you were still delivering out of a borrowed truck." "I remember. That's why I came up here myself instead of sending a memo." He folded his hands on the table. 4 bloated batches. 4. Customers returning product at the register. That's a black eye for me. People complaining. You know what happens to a product that bloats twice on the shelf? It comes off the shelf. It comes off and it doesn't come back. That's not a punishment, that's memory a housewife remembers. Harlan turned to look out at the yard, where one of his own trucks was backing in, his name painted across the side in big letters. "Give me a deadline." "I already gave you one." "Give me another." Alton stood and picked up his folder. "One more bloated batch out of that station, and I pull your cheese off my shelves. And I don't want to do that, Harlan. I want you to tell me, name and address, what the problem actually is." When he left, Harlan sat alone in that room for a while. Then he called the office girl in. "Can you find out something for me? About the Piney Ridge station?" "Sure thing. There's a woman who works up near there. Walks the road in the morning with a bucket and a long brush on her shoulder. Her name's Adeline." "Adeline what?" "I didn't ask." He rubbed his forehead, annoyed with himself. "I want to thank her properly. She pulled me out of a mud hole up at Miller's Gap and wouldn't take a dime for it." The answer came back 2 days later, in a short note the girl left on his desk. It came from Pruitt Sanitation and Supply. It said their support staff had high turnover, that most worked day rate with no fixed roster, and that it hadn't been possible to identify the person mentioned. Harlan read it, found it odd for about 2 seconds, and moved on to the next page in the stack. He had a whole regional chain to hold on to, and he'd just let slip the one piece of information that would have solved everything before it happened. The rain came that afternoon and didn't let up all night, all the way down the ridge. By morning, Miller's Gap Road wasn't a road anymore. It was a channel of brown water running over the ground, stones rolling, fence line down. Nobody made it up, not the Pruitt van, not Abe's truck, not anybody on foot. The milk sat in the tanks, cooling, waiting. The building sat locked up with the line still full inside, the elbow joint exactly where it always was. When the road went down 2 days later, the truck went up and hauled it all at once. It was the biggest single load of the fortnight, and it was the load that finished everything off. Weeks later, back in the city, a whole shelf front of Clearwater cheese started swelling inside its packaging. Sunridge Markets pulled it, called it in, and sent the whole load back on a truck that rolled into the plant yard in reverse, with a company man waiting on the loading dock to count every piece by hand. It was the worst bloat event in the company's history, and this time there was no question about where it came from. It was stamped right on the case. Piney Ridge. Harlan Mercer went back up the mountain. He didn't come alone this time. He brought the plant's lab technician and a folder full of test results. He came in a borrowed pickup so he wouldn't get stuck again. He came quiet, had everybody gathered in the yard at the Piney Ridge station, and the whole valley came up to meet him. Tate Combs came up with his hat in his hand and his jaw set hard. Loretta Shaw came up with 2 of her kids. Bo and Odell Combs came. Vern came, the one who'd already gone into town twice asking about cattle prices. Zelda came, who didn't milk a single cow but never missed a thing. The whole valley came and stood in the sun, waiting to hear what they already half knew. Harlan didn't say much, which was his way. He said the chain had sent the load back. He said the contract was suspended. He said the company would decide in the next few days whether it would keep buying milk from up there at all. Then he turned to Otis Dale. Was the cleaning protocol followed? Otis pressed the clipboard to his chest and looked over at Hank Pruitt, and Hank stepped forward with the rubber-banded folder under his arm, like a man who'd been waiting for that question a long time. "Mr. Mercer, I'm going to be the first one to call out my own company." The yard went quiet. "I put a strict system in place here. A log for every wash, signed by whoever did the cleaning. It's all right here." He opened the folder and showed the stack to the crowd, flipping through it slow the way a man deals a deck of cards. Every log a name. He pulled one sheet from the middle and held it up high. "Only I had my office go back through everything, and I found something that made me sick to my stomach." He paused. He knew how. "There's a log signed for a night when the person wasn't even here." A murmur ran through the yard. "There's a log signed for the night of the storm, Mr. Mercer. The night the road turned to a river and nobody made it up here. And there's a pretty little name right there on the line." He turned the sheet toward the crowd. "Adeline." It felt like the whole yard spun at once. She was standing at the back near the washroom door, hairnet on, hands folded over her apron, the same as before. Heads turned, one after another. "I trusted this woman," Hank went on, and now there was a rehearsed little tremble in his voice. "She's the most senior one here. I made her the one in charge. I paid her extra to check the other girls' work, and she signed for a night when there wasn't any washing done at all. I signed it." Her voice came from the back of the building, and everybody heard it. Adeline had already taken 2 steps into the light. She was still in her wet apron, boots dirty with wash water. "I signed it," she said again. "Signed the whole month at once, sitting in his van with his pen. Anibal Pruitt handed me 31 blank sheets." Hank threw his arms wide to the crowd like a man presenting Exhibit A. "You hear that? She admits it herself. I told you to sign the washes you did. You handed me 31 blank pages, Mr. Pruitt. Adeline, honey, are you upset? You crossed my shingle debt off the ledger that same hour, Mr. Pruitt, right in front of me, wet pencil in your mouth." And that's when the worst thing that morning happened. It wasn't Hank talking, it was the crowd. "What about the money, Adeline?" Tate Combs had stepped forward, hat still in his hand. "The money they docked from me 3 years running, saying my milk was dirty. Where'd it go?" "I sold a calf, sold it on account of a deduction." "Mr. Combs, you're not understanding. I understand a woman signed a paper for a night she never worked. Your milk isn't dirty." "Then what is it?" "It's my barn, my cans. That's what they've told me all year long. And the only paper that's turned up so far has got your name on it." Loretta Shaw didn't say a word. She just looked. And the look of a woman who had 4 kids and 7 cows, and who had spent that whole winter paying for a guilt that wasn't hers, was worse than anything Tate could have shouted. Adeline looked around for something to hold on to, and found nothing close by. She looked at the one man in that yard who knew who she was. Harlan Mercer stood about 6 paces off, shirt sleeves rolled, folder in hand. And he recognized her right away. Recognized the way she stood, weight on one hip. Recognized the voice that had once told him to take his foot off the gas, and the whole memory of that mud came rushing back with it. The smell of wet grass and the thin whistle of air leaking from a tire. He opened his mouth and said nothing. He just stood there, folder in hand, letting it happen, because he had a report in his hand, because he had a whole chain waiting on an answer. And a man doesn't come apart the story he just got handed in front of 40 farmers without something else in his pocket to replace it. Hank made the most of the owner's silence, the way he made the most of every silence. "Effective today, Judy takes over as head of sanitation for this station," he said, "and Adeline is let go from my company." Judy stood by the tank in her hairnet. She didn't look at Adeline. She looked at the floor of the washroom, a floor she knew because Adeline had taught her how to wash it. Adeline took off her hairnet. It was a simple gesture. She pulled it off her head, folded it in quarters, and set it on top of the tank, the way you'd set down something that was never yours. Then she took off the apron, folded that too, and laid it on top of the hairnet. She picked up the long-handled brush that had been leaning against the wall and set it on her shoulder. "This one's mine," she said. Always was. And she walked out through the yard, through the middle of the crowd, with the whole valley clearing a path and watching. Nobody spoke to her. Heading down Miller's Gap Road, she passed the mud hole, where the 2 planks still leaned against the fence post, the way she'd left them. She sat on the bank and, alone with the brush across her lap, let her face fall into her hands. What Adeline didn't know, sitting on that bank, was that up at the station, Harlan had asked to see the storm night log one more time, and had noticed something nobody in that yard had caught. All 31 signatures were done in the same pen, and all 31 had been made with a steady hand, one under the other, without a single tremor. Not the way a person signs at the end of a night of hard washing, hand aching, wrist wet, but the way a person signs in a row, seated at a table. The news came down the mountain ahead of her. By the end of that week, there wasn't a household up on the ridge that hadn't heard it, the way things get known in places like that. twisted and complete at the same time. The woman who signed a fake paper. The cleaning lady who took money on the side. The one who dirtied the milk of the whole valley and then had the nerve to show up in her hairnet at the meeting and play the victim. Zelda told the story at the store with a new detail every time. In one version, Adeline had gotten a fat payoff. In another, she'd been caught with a jug of the chemical hidden in her house. And there was one version that hurt worse than the rest, because it was almost true. Somebody had seen, weeks earlier, Adeline pulling the company owner's car out of the mud at Miller's Gap. That day it had made a fine story to tell. Everybody thought it was funny. Everybody talked about it. Now the same story had turned into something else. Oh, that one had already gotten friendly with him out on that road. Thought she was going to land herself a rich man. Got herself a millionaire, and what did she get for it? Got herself run out of town. One afternoon she walked past the store and heard the laughing before she understood what it was about. By the time she understood, it was too close to walk away from. "Adeline," Zelda called out, sweet as pie, the way people get sweet right when they're about to be cruel. "That true he handed you money out on the road?" "No, he didn't." "Didn't?" A little giggle went round the group. "Well, honey, if it was me, I'd have taken it." "I bet you would have," Adeline said and kept walking. It was the sharpest thing she said the whole ordeal, and she regretted it before she even got home. Adeline went into town looking for work, knocked on 3 doors of families who always needed help with wash and ironing. At the first, the woman said she'd already found somebody. At the second, the woman looked her over and said she'd think on it. At the third, the door barely opened before it shut again. She walked the 2 miles home in the heat, her skirt sticking to her legs, understanding slow the true size of what had happened. It wasn't just the station job she'd lost. It was her name. In a small place, your name's your tool. Once it breaks, you're left with no hands at all. Simon came home 3 days later, face closed up tight. "Abe let me go." He said what? Said word came down from up top that the truck belongs to the company and the company doesn't want any trouble. He tossed his cap on the table. "I'm going to head to the city, Ma. Vern's got people down there who put men to work on the job sites. I'm no good for anything up here anymore. Up here I'm just the son of the woman who signed." He stopped, embarrassed at what he'd just said. "Sorry, Ma." "Don't be sorry. That's what happened, all right. But you know that's not who I am." Simon looked at her and the words didn't come. He was a young man. Young men don't know how to say things like that. All they know is to feel it and get angry over it. "Why'd you sign, Ma?" he asked. "Just tell me that." Adeline didn't make excuses. She could have talked about the advance, the leak, the 14 shingles, the fear of the station closing. "Because I let myself believe in a man I already knew wasn't worth trusting," she said. "And because I thought putting my name on it would make the others do it right. That was foolishness on my part, Simon Cross." He sat quiet a while. "Did you wash clean every night you worked?" "Everyone." "Then what got dirtied was your name, not your work." And he went up to his room. That night, with the house dark and her son asleep upstairs, Adeline couldn't lie still. She got up, filled the bucket, added soap, went and got her mother's brush from behind the door, and started scrubbing the floor of her own house. The cement floor, worn smooth, already clean, had been clean for as long as anybody could remember. Not a crumb on it, not a stain. She scrubbed it anyway, on her knees in one corner then the other, dragging the bucket along with her hand. She scrubbed the doorsill, scrubbed under the table, scrubbed the base of the stove where soot always tried to stick. Her arm started to ache and she kept going. She cried quiet, so as not to wake her son, face turned away, not letting go of the handle, because it was the only thing left in this world she still knew how to do right. And because her mother had taught her that a house left dirty by a sad person is a house that sinks for good. When she finished, the sky outside was starting to grey. She sat on the wet floor, back against the wall, hands wrinkled from the water. The brush handle was worn smooth in the middle from the grip of 2 different hands over the years. Near the tip were 3 deep notches cut with a nail, the mark Miss Alice put on every tool she owned. Adeline ran her thumb over the notches. "Help me hold on," she said quietly, to a woman who wasn't there anymore. It was that same week that Wallace Doyle knocked on her door after dark. He was the night watchman up at the Piney Ridge station, an old man who walked with a limp, spent his nights on a stool by the washroom door with a lantern in his lap, the kind of man the valley treated like part of the furniture. Before that, he'd been the master cheesemaker down at Old Man Fortner's dairy. He stepped inside, pulled off his hat and sat on the edge of the bench. "I wasn't out at the meeting that day," he said. "I sleep days." "I know, Mr. Wallace. If I had been, I'd have spoken up. Now I've come to speak here, which is worse, because talking in somebody's house is cheap and talking out in the open costs something." She put coffee on for him. "Adeline, your mama washed her whole life alongside me at that old dairy down by the creek." "I know." "You don't know it all." He set a package on the table, wrapped in newspaper, tied off with twine. Inside was a big hardback ledger, spine cracked, page edges gone dark with age. Fortner's wash log, he was strict about it. Whoever did the wash at night wrote down what they did and signed underneath. After. Always after, never before. He tapped a finger on the cover. That was the rule of the house. A signature's a report, not a promise. Sign before you're making a promise. Sign after you're answering for something. Adeline opened the ledger slow, page after page, the same careful handwriting down the right-hand column. Alice, Alice, Alice. She ran her hand over the page and couldn't talk for a while. "There's a page toward the back," the old man said. "One night, Fortner's son told your mama to sign for a wash the other crew did on their side. She wouldn't. Stayed away 3 days. Old man came round and made it right. She never told me that. Mothers don't tell you what hurts. Mothers teach you the rule and swallow the fight." He drank the coffee down in one go, the way old men do. "Now listen to the rest, because it's what I came to say." He told her that since Pruitt took over the cleaning, the line at the station had never once been opened. He knew because he was the one on the door all night, and because the wrenches stayed in the van and the van drove off. Told her the drum came up full and went back half empty. Told her he'd complained to Otis Dale twice, and Otis had told him that wasn't watchman's business. Adeline stared at the lantern flame a while. "Mr. Wallace, if I open that joint in front of everybody, that's it. It's over." "Over for who?" "For him. And it's over for you too, honey, if you get it wrong." The old man pointed a crooked finger at her. "You get one shot at this. One. If you do it halfway, nobody in this valley's ever going to listen to you again for the rest of your life." She didn't quite catch that part. It was the part she needed to hear most. The next afternoon, she waited for Otis Dale at the bend in the road on his way down to town. The manager stopped his truck with no interest in talking. "Adeline, I can't be seen talking to you. You can listen to me for 2 minutes. What do you want?" "One night. One night to wash it right. My own way. I go in after Judy leaves. I clean both tanks myself, and you won't even have to say you know I was there." "You've lost your mind, Adeline. The company's deciding this week. If it closes, you lose the station, and then what do you do?" That landed. Otis Dale was a weak man, and weak men don't switch sides for justice. They switch for fear. He drummed his fingers on the wheel 5 times. "Anybody sees you, I don't know a thing about it. Nobody's going to see me. And if it goes wrong, it's not going to go wrong," she said. And it was that line, said right there in the road, quick and angry, that ended up costing her everything. Because Adeline went into that building that night and did the most careful work of her life. Warm water first, hot soap at the right strength measured in her own cup, not Hank Pruitt's scratched line, scrub brush, corner by corner, wall by wall, both tanks. She ran her finger down the steel. It sang. She cried with relief, alone, hearing that little sound in the empty building, Wallace's lantern flickering outside. Then she got to the line, the run of pipe coming down off the pump with the thick hose and the elbow joint held tight with a union nut. She had no wrench. It was in the van across the ridge. Adeline stood in front of that joint a long moment. Then she did the thing she'd spent her whole life calling shameful. She ran hot, soapy water through the line, pump running, and let it flow. Then clean water after. Then she checked the hose by feel from the outside, squeezed it with her hand and told herself it was good enough, that this time it would hold, that a clean tank made up for it. She'd skipped the joint, just like the man she despised. 2 days later, the little test wedge of cheese that Otis always kept back from that batch to age in the curing room bloomed on the shelf. Bloomed bad, the rind splitting open. Judy came in for the next night's wash and knew right away. The tank wall felt different under her hand. Adeline's measuring cup was still sitting on the bench, and the building still smelled like real soap. She told Hank Pruitt everything before the test cheese even had time to finish swelling. Hank didn't waste a minute. By the next morning, he was already in the station yard, red-capped drum at his side, telling anybody who'd listen that a woman let go from his company had come in at night, without authorization, alone, and gotten into the tanks, and that the test cheese from that milk had bloated. "I'm not accusing anybody of anything," he said, voice mild. "I'm just telling you what happened. Everybody can draw their own conclusion." Everybody drew it. Otis Dale, leaning in the doorway with his clipboard to his chest, swore up and down he'd known nothing, never authorized it, was going to have the lock changed. Zelda carried the news to the store before lunch, and the Valley, which already had its answer ready, just fit the new piece right in. The woman had snuck back in to finish the job for good. Adeline stayed in the house 2 days without going out. On the first night, Judy knocked at the door, coming up along the edge of the field so nobody would see her, an envelope in her hand and her face swollen from old crying. "I'm not coming in," she said right off. "I just came to drop this." It was Adeline's pay for the 2 weeks. Adeline looked at the envelope and didn't take it. "I don't want your money, Judy." "I can't sleep, Adeline." "You'll sleep. You're just sleeping bad right now." Judy leaned her forehead on the doorframe and stood there holding the envelope. The two of them had washed side by side a long time, eaten bread and coffee standing up, backs against the counter, in the hour before the mountain even lightened up. Traded boots when one pair sprung a hole. Judy had learned to scrub a tank corner with that woman's hand over hers. "I could have spoken up out there." "You could have." "I opened my mouth, I swear I did. Then I thought about my boys and my mouth just shut on its own." Adeline didn't say anything. "And there's something worse." Judy talked fast, before her nerve gave out. "It was me who told Mr. Pruitt you came into the building that night. He asked me straight out that morning and I told him everything. Told him about the cup on the bench. Told him about the smell of soap." Adeline closed her eyes for a second. "And there's more," Judy went on. "The day the owner got stuck in the mud at Miller's Gap, I was in the van. I saw the car sunk in the mud and saw the man in the suit standing in it. I told the driver to stop and he showed me his watch. Said we had another station to hit and being late wasn't part of the deal." She swallowed hard. "We just drove on by. I drove on by, Adeline. Right at that moment, I'd already turned into somebody who just passes." Adeline looked out at the dark past the porch light. "Judy, I'm not mad at you. You are, maybe not the way I think. I'm not. I'm not mad because I understand exactly why you kept quiet. And that reminds me exactly why I signed." Judy stood there a while longer, then went back down the hill crying quiet, taking the envelope with her. On the third day, Wallace Doyle came up the rise and sat on the bench, looking a long time at the basil pot on the rail. "So you skipped the joint," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did." "Why?" "Because I didn't have a wrench, and because I wanted to show good work before the truck came." She twisted the dish towel in her hands. "I did the same thing I've been calling that man shameless for 3 years running." The old man shook his head slow. Then he said something that turned the whole story on its head. "Adeline, think hard on what you actually did. I did something foolish. You ran a test." He raised his head to look at her. "You washed both tanks your mother's way, steel clean, steel singing. You told me so yourself. And the cheese bloated anyway." He tapped his finger on his knee, once for each word. "So it's not the tanks, not the farmer's cans, not Tate Combs's barn, not anybody's hands up top." Something in her shifted differently. "It's the line. It's the line." The two of them sat quiet a while, listening to the wind on the neighbor's tin roof. "Mr. Wallace, and if I open that joint and it's clean? Then you're wrong, and everybody turns the page. And if it's dirty?" The old man smiled with half his mouth, the way people do who've seen a great deal. "Then, honey, you won't have to say a single word. It'll speak for itself." It was late that same afternoon that the car pulled up in front of her house. Not the borrowed pickup, the same car from the very first day, tires holding air fine now. Harlan Mercer got out in his suit, tie straight, and came up the rise careful, walking ground he plainly didn't know how to walk. Adeline came out onto the porch and crossed her arms. She stood there leaning against the doorframe of the whitewashed house, the dirt road behind him, and the green hillside on the other side, and she didn't invite him in. "Afternoon, Miss Adeline." She didn't answer. "I came to apologize." "You can apologize from right where you're standing." He stopped where he was, opened his hands the way a man does when he's used to explaining things with his arms. "I recognized you that day at the station." "I know you did. I knew who you were the moment you spoke, and I kept my mouth shut." "I know that too. You're not going to make this easy on me." "No, I'm not." He laughed, short with no joy in it, and rubbed the back of his neck. "I had a lab report in my hand, 40 farmers in front of me, and a big chain waiting on an answer, and somebody handed me a ready-made explanation, all wrapped up, paper and everything. I took it. You did worse than that. I did." "You looked at me." She said it twice. "You looked right at me that day of the visit, standing there against that wall with 3 other women in hairnets. You walked within 2 feet of me, mister. You looked at me. You just didn't see me." Harlan went quiet. "I came here to say 2 things, he said after a while. "The first is that I had the lab tech run some numbers with me back at the plant, using the purchase records." He pulled a folded sheet from his inside pocket. "The company pays Pruitt Sanitation by the station. Included in that price is the chemical. I pulled the volume his company bought in detergent and acid over the last stretch, and compared it against what a station this size would actually need, washing every night the way the contract says. And less than a third." Adeline shifted her weight. "And there's something else. I looked at those 31 logs again, every one the same pen, every one the line steady, one under the other." He raised his eyes to her. "You signed all of it at once, in one place." "I did." "Why?" "Because I let myself believe my name on that paper would make the work get done right." She straightened her back. "And because I had 14 busted shingles over my son's bed, and Mr. Pruitt crossed out my debt right in front of me." He lowered his head. "I didn't come here to say you're not at fault, you are." "I know I am." She said it plain. "I carry mine. I put my name to something I never laid eyes on. Never again, long as I live. But I'm not carrying yours, or Hank Pruitt's either. That's exactly what everybody wants me carrying. That's why I came." Harlan took a step. "I want you back." "No." "Miss Adeline, listen." "No. I'm not coming back to wash in the shadows with the whole valley, thinking I'm the one who dirtied their milk. I'm done wiping up after you, mister." "Then tell me how it's got to be." And it was right there on that porch with the sun going down behind the ridge that Adeline laid out her terms. She spoke slow, one at a time, the way you count out money. "First, that line gets opened out in the yard, in front of the whole valley, by whoever from the community wants to open it. Not you, not me, not Otis Dale, them, whoever wants to." Done. "Second, the wrenches stay hanging at the station on a nail in plain sight. A pipe wrench doesn't live inside anybody's van." Done. "Third, whoever washes signs after, never before, and the day's log stays pinned on the washroom wall. Anybody who walks into that building can read exactly what's written there." She pointed a finger. "If there's going to be paper, let it be paper that belongs to the people doing the work." Done. "Fourth." She paused. This was the one that mattered. "If it turns out this was never the valley's milk, you pay back every dollar you docked from these people. Every one." Harlan took a breath. "That's a lot of money." "It's their money. It'll take time." "Then you say so, right out in front of everybody. Exactly how much and how many pickups it'll take you to pay it back. They'll wait. These folks know how to wait better than you do." He held her gaze a long moment, this woman standing arms crossed in her doorway, apron clean, hands worn from work, and felt exactly what he'd felt back in that mud hole, that he wasn't the one calling the shots here, not by a long stretch. "Done," he said. "There's a 5th one. Say it." She unfolded her arms from the doorframe. "You can bring your lab reports if you want, but paper's not what's going to settle this. Paper's what buried me. Whatever gets proven has to be proven by hand." "By hand how?" "The way my mother taught me. Anybody can put their finger on it and know, doesn't take reading." Harlan Mercer stood quiet a moment in that little dirt yard. Then he held his hand out to her. Adeline looked at the offered hand and shook it. It was set for the morning of the next pickup in the yard at the Piney Ridge station, with the whole valley invited, gate to gate, by Simon and by Wallace Doyle. In the days that were left, 3 things arrived at that house. The first came at night by bicycle, nobody saying a word to anybody. Marley Pruitt stopped at the bottom of the rise, leaned the bike on the fence post, and stood there without coming up. "Miss Adeline, ma'am, I write everything for my daddy." Her voice was shaking. "Logs, ledgers, delivery records, all of it. He doesn't write a thing, he just signs." "I know that, Marley. You know what else I write?" She pulled a notebook out from under her blouse. "I write down how many drums leave the storeroom and how many come back. He has me keep it, because he needs to know how much he's got left to sell." Adeline came down the rise slow. "Honey, if you hand that over, your daddy's going to know." He's going to know anyway." Marley wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I wrote your debt getting crossed off that day, Miss Adeline. Wrote it in my own hand. I haven't slept right in weeks over it." The second thing came on Wallace's back, in a wooden box with a leather hinge. It was the wrench set from Old Man Fortner's old dairy. Pipe wrench, socket wrench, a whole set, greased, wrapped in cloth. "Fortner gave them to me when the place closed," Wallace said. "Told me, as good tools are patient, they wait." The third came by way of Simon. He'd hitched a ride across the ridge to ask around at the other station, and came back with something simple and devastating. Over there it was the same drum, same chemical, same van, and there too, not once, not ever, had anybody opened that elbow joint. What Hank Pruitt still didn't know was that on that morning, it wasn't Adeline who was going on trial in that yard. It was his own hose. That morning, the valley was up before the rooster. Low fog on the grass, the smell of wet earth, cans knocking against each other going downhill, nobody talking loud. Adeline walked up the road by Miller's Gap, brush on her shoulder, bucket in hand, the same way as that very first morning. She passed the mud hole. The 2 planks were still leaning against the fence post. She stopped there a moment, just a moment. Then she climbed on. The station yard was packed. All the farmers stood there, hats in hand, in their good clothes. Loretta Shaw stood with her 4 kids. Tate Combs stood up front, arms crossed. Beau and Odell Combs were there. Vern was there, who'd put off selling his cattle on account of that morning. Zelda stood off in the shade with the other gossips. Wallace Doyle stood in a buttoned-up shirt with his toolbox on his lap. Simon leaned against the corner of the building, jaw set. Otis Dale stood with a clipboard that wasn't going to shield him from anything that day. Judy stood in her hairnet by the tank, not knowing where to put her hands. Harlan Mercer stood there without a tie, and the white van sat parked in the shade of the oak, Hank Pruitt leaning against it, shirt pressed, smiling at everybody who passed. He didn't look worried. Men like him don't get worried until it's much too late. Harlan climbed the platform and, as always, said little. "I came up here in front of all of you to find out where the trouble is with this milk. It's not a report that's going to tell us. It's your own hands." Then he stepped down and looked at Adeline. She walked into the building with the crowd behind her, and the building that had always been hers went small with all those people in it. "Whoever wants to come close, she said. "Whoever doesn't want to lay a hand on it, don't. But I don't want anybody watching me from a distance today, because today belongs to everybody." The morning milk was still being weighed outside on the porch scale. Both tanks stood empty, waiting, the way they always sat after the truck went down the evening before. She opened the lid on the first. "This one got washed last night. Wasn't me." "It was the crew handling it now," she said. Judy spoke up quiet. "It was me," Judy said. Adeline didn't look at her in anger. "The way they told you to wash. That's what's on trial here today, not Judy." She stepped in halfway, one leg over the rim, voice echoing off the steel. "Clean steel sings. Dirty steel slides. This isn't grandmother talk. This is the easiest thing in the world to check. Whoever wants to, come put your finger on it." Tate Combs went first because Tate Combs was the angriest. He reached his arm in, ran a finger down the wall, and made a face like he didn't understand what he was feeling. "It slides. It slides. And it's supposed to do what? Supposed to squeak. Catch on your finger, make that little sound like a nail on glass." One after another they went. Odell Combs went, Beau went. Loretta's kids went and thought it was funny. Zelda went and didn't think it was funny at all. Every one of them said the same word. Slides. Hank Pruitt worked his way through with an easy manner. Dr. Mercer, with all respect, this is folklore. A finger's not a lab test. What we use is professional-grade product. It's got a manufacturer's certificate. It's registered, all of it. Mr. Pruitt, Adeline cut in. You put your finger in? He laughed. I'm not the cleaning crew, ma'am. That's it exactly, she said. That's the whole problem. A few of the women laughed low in the back. It was the first time in weeks anybody had laughed on her side, and she felt it in her spine like sun. Adeline asked for a bucket of warm water, soap at the right strength, and picked up the brush. And right there, in front of the whole valley, half her body inside the tank, she scrubbed a patch of wall the size of a serving tray. Scrubbed with her arm, scrubbed till her shoulder ached. Nobody said a word the whole time, and the only sound in the building was bristle against steel. She rinsed it with a dipper. Now try it again. Tate reached his arm in, ran his finger outside the scrubbed patch, slid, ran it across the scrubbed patch, sang. He pulled his arm back out and stood there staring at his own finger with a look nobody in that valley had ever seen on that man before. Try it, Beau, he said, his voice different, and they all went again one by one, each doing the same thing. Testing outside, testing inside, going quiet. That's not product, Adeline said. That's elbow grease. Product helps. Product doesn't scrub for you. Hank had stopped smiling. Second test is the water, she said. She had the neighboring tank filled with clean water. I never laid a hand in this one, she warned. This is the one they handed over, washed last night, exactly the way it was left. She stirred it with the dipper, then cracked the drain valve and filled a glass jar. She held it up against the light from the door. A thin film of stubborn suds sat on top, the kind that won't break down. Soap, she said. She passed the jar hand to hand. What you're looking at is leftover product. That didn't come out in the rinse, because there wasn't a real rinse. And this goes right out with your milk. And the milk gets to the city with all that soap still in it, she said. So what? Vern asked. Soap hurt the cheese any? It was Wallace who answered, and the old man didn't need to raise his voice because the building had gone dead silent. It does, but not the way you're thinking, son. He stepped in a couple paces. Cheese is a living thing. You put the starter culture in the milk, and that culture's got to take hold, got to work, got to sour that milk right on schedule. That's what holds everything together. When the milk sours on time, the rest of the bad stuff doesn't get a foothold. He pointed at the jar. Then you go and dump leftover product in the mix. The starter culture can't take hold right, goes sluggish, falls behind, and the milk just sits there, warm, with nobody minding the store. And then whatever gets there first takes over. And what gets there first is exactly the kind of bug that makes gas. Gas blows the cheese up from the inside. That's your bloat. A long murmur ran through the building. Your cheese isn't bloating because the milk's dirty, the old man said. It's bloating because somebody pulled the starter culture out of the field. Adeline let the murmur settle. Now the third test. She pointed at the line. The steel pipe running down from the pump cut through the wall, bent into an elbow, and ended in a thick hose nobody ever looked at. Because nobody looks at the hose. Every drop of milk this whole valley brings in runs through here. Whatever's living in here ends up in everything that leaves this building. She put her hand on the joint. This opens with a wrench. Hasn't been opened once since Pruitt took over. Not one time. That's maintenance work, Hank said. Then call maintenance, Mr. Pruitt. It's not in the contract. You're telling the owner and everybody standing here that this joint hasn't been touched in 3 years. Hank looked at Harlan, looked at the crowd, and did the only thing left to do. Everything's within procedure. Wallace set the wooden box down on the floor. The clatter of the iron wrenches on the concrete was the loudest sound that whole morning. These wrenches belong to Old Man Fortner's dairy, the old man said. They're greased up. They'll work fine. Adeline picked up the biggest one and held it out handle first, not to Harlan but to Tate Combs. The man looked at that wrench for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. Why me? Because you hollered at me the loudest in that yard, she said, no anger in it. If I open it, you can say I set it up. If you open it, nobody can say a thing. Tate took the wrench, fit it to the union nut with the grip of a man who'd handled fence wire his whole life, and put his weight into it. It didn't budge. He leaned in with his whole body. The nut groaned, turned, and the union broke loose. He pulled the elbow free and tilted the open end toward the light from the door. And the whole building took a step back at once. Inside that elbow was a layer thick as a finger, dark, soft, stuck to the steel wall like a growth that had learned to live there. The smell came a second later, sour, sweet, and rotten all at once, and it climbed up and filled the whole room. Odell Combs put a hand over her mouth. One of Loretta's boys ran outside. Tate stood frozen, holding that piece of pipe in both hands, unable to take his eyes off what was inside it. "Lord above," he said. Adeline picked up a white dish towel and ran it through the inside. It came out black. She held it up high for everyone to see, the same way Hank had held up the log with her name on it out in that yard. "This has been running through your milk, every one of you, every single day for 3 years, she said. Nobody spoke. "And the gasket," she went on, pulling the rubber seal out of the union. "Look at it. Cracked, gone stiff. A seal like that gets replaced. This one's the same one that was in there the day I started." She turned to Harlan. "You had that lab man run a number for you. Run another one. Ask him how many replacement gaskets your company bought over these 3 years." "None," Harlan said. "I already asked." Hank Pruitt started drifting toward the door. Not running, just walking, folder under his arm like a man who'd just remembered an appointment. "Mr. Pruitt," Adeline called. He stopped. "You held up a log with my name on it in front of these people. Now I want to talk about my name in front of these same people." She climbed up on the wooden platform where everybody could see. "I signed 31 blank sheets sitting on the running board of his van with his pen. I signed nights I never worked. Signed the night of the storm, when nobody made it up this mountain. I'm not asking a single soul here to pretend that didn't happen." The whole yard had gone silent. "It was wrong, and I'm the one who did it. If anybody wants to call me a fool, go on and call me one, I won't argue. But why is it my name he wanted? Right there." She pointed at the van. "He's got hands that'll sign whatever's put in front of them without reading a word. Plenty of them. Why was it my name he needed?" She let the question hang. "Because I'm the most senior one here. Because this valley knows me. Because if it ever went wrong, he needed the blame to have a face, and a familiar face, so folks would believe it fast and stop asking questions." Otis Dale dropped his clipboard onto the tank. The clatter turned everybody's head. "Dr. Mercer, I've got to say something." "Say it, Otis." "I cut the wash time." His voice came out thin. "I let that van leave early plenty of times. I turned this woman down for the key 3 times, and I let her in that one night without telling anybody, and then I stood up in this same yard and swore I never authorized it." He looked at Adeline. "I'm sorry." Judy pulled her hairnet off her head. "The wash we do runs half an hour," she said, crying. "Half an hour, sir, and when the van honks it runs less than that. For both tanks, the floor, the bench, and the curing room. Nobody's ever opened a thing." She looked at Adeline. "I signed everything they handed me. I'm no better than Adeline. I just wasn't the one picked to pay for it." Marley climbed down off the bench of the van with the hardback ledger pressed to her chest, walked right past her father without a glance, climbed the platform, opened the notebook, and read out, voice shaking, line by line, exactly how many drums left the storeroom for the station, and how many came back half full. Hank Pruitt stood there and listened to his daughter read. He didn't say a word. When she finished, he turned around, got into the white van alone, and drove down Miller's Gap Road slow, the whole valley watching the back of that vehicle. No shouting, no rocks thrown, not one word following after. That's how it ended. No police, no judge, nobody dragged off in handcuffs. Just a man driving down a dirt road in a car that had already been paid for, with money he'd taken from people who milked cows before sunrise. When the van disappeared around the bend, the yard fell into that strange quiet that comes after something big has happened. Harlan Mercer climbed the platform. He was without a tie, sleeve rolled up, hand still dirty from the pipe that had gone hand to hand through the building. "I need to say something, and I want to say it standing up here because it's where I said the other things." The crowd pressed in closer. "When I opened up bidding for cleaning services on my stations, 3 companies showed up. I took the cheapest one, took it without looking at anything past the price." He let that sit. I've been coming to this station 3 years. I've walked into that building 10 times. I never once opened a pipe, never once ran my finger down a tank wall. I'd look at the shine on the floor, smell the chemical in the air, and drive off thinking everything was fine. You weren't obligated to, somebody in the crowd called out. I was. He pointed at the company name on the truck parked in the yard. Is my name on that? If my name's on it, I'm obligated. Then he said the hard part. And there's more. Every dollar that got docked off your pay these 3 years, calling it substandard milk, I'm the one who signed off on it. Not Pruitt, not Otis, not the cleaning woman. Me. Tate Combs lowered his hat. I'm going to pay it all back. A murmur went through the yard. I'll pay it the way I've got it, which is 1 pickup at a time. I'll have my office go back through every farmer, every deduction, every year, and every one of you is going to get your share, a piece at a time, every collection until it's paid in full. He looked out at the crowd. I won't promise it's fast. I'll promise it doesn't stop till it's done. And if you disappear? Vern asked. Then Miss Adeline's got the list, Wallace Doyle's got the list, and you've all got my face to go find. He took a breath. The contract with Pruitt Sanitation ends today. I'm having my office send written notice this afternoon. The wrenches stay hanging on that wall on a nail right there in plain sight, and they belong to this station. The line gets opened every week, and anybody who wants to watch is welcome to. And the wash log stays pinned to the wall in that room, signed after the work's done by whoever did it. Never before. Never before, Wallace called out from the bench. Never before, Harlan repeated. Then he stepped down off the platform, crossed the yard, and stopped in front of Adeline in front of everybody. Miss Adeline, I want you running the sanitation at this station. She didn't answer right away. She stood there, brush against her leg, the black rag still in her hand. With 3 conditions. Somebody laughed in the back. It was a good laugh. Say the first. I don't work under any middleman ever again. If I'm doing this, it's with you, directly, your company's name on the paper. And I want to read that paper before I sign it. Read it slow. I read slow. Done. Second, Judy, Cleo, and Yvonne come back with me. Judy's head came up sharp. Adeline, you don't have to. Hush, Judy. Adeline said it without any hardness. You did what you were told. I signed what I was told. The difference between the two of us is about the width of a hair, and I'm not standing over anybody here. And the third? Harlan asked. Time. She tapped the brush against the concrete once. Washing this station right takes 2 hours. 3 on acid nights. You give me 40 minutes. I'll be right back to giving you garbage. And 3 years from now, we'll all be standing right here again with a pipe in our hands. Harlan Mercer held his hand out to her a second time in this whole story, and she shook it a second time. The yard broke into applause. It wasn't pretty party applause. It was the scattered, uneven kind that comes from people who don't quite know when to start. Farmers clapping with hats in hand and women clapping with a hand over their mouth. Tate Combs waited for it to die down, then walked over to her, hat twisted in both hands, and had to clear his throat twice before the words came out. Miss Adeline, I hollered at you in that yard, in front of the whole valley. You did. I called you a thing I shouldn't have. You did that too. He looked down at his boots. I'd sold a calf that week over a deduction. Came home and my wife asked where the calf went, and I didn't have an answer for her. He gripped the hat tighter. Then somebody to blame showed up, and I grabbed onto it with both hands, because it was better than having nobody to blame at all. I know. You forgive me. I'll forgive you on one condition. What's that? You let me come out to your place and teach you to wash that hose on your milking rig right. Tate's mouth fell open. My cans are good. Your cans are fine. Your hose elbow's the same as that one right there. She pointed at the piece of pipe sitting on the bench. Every hose in creation is the same, Mr. Combs. Nobody ever opens them. We're going to open yours next week. He laughed, and it was a strange thing to watch because that man hadn't laughed in a long while, and his face didn't look used to the work of it. Life didn't turn around overnight. It never does. It took weeks for the company to run the whole deduction list, farmer by farmer, year by year. It took longer still for the first payment to go out, but it went out. Loretta Shaw got her share on the first pickup and stood there with the open envelope in her hand, looking at that money like it wasn't supposed to exist. She'd already arranged to sell off 2 more cows. She went and cancelled the sale that same day. Her oldest boy, who'd already had his bag packed and leaning against his bedroom wall ready to head to the city, unpacked it slow, without a word to anybody, and the next morning he was back out at the barn, sitting on his stool. Simon went back to riding the truck route with Abe Whitfield the following week. The old driver went and fetched the boy from the house himself, hat in hand, and apologized to the mother before he apologized to the son. "Miss Adeline, I followed an order I knew was crooked. You had that truck payment to make?" "I did. And that's the shame I traded you for, a car payment." She made him coffee because that's what you do. And Simon, who was young and had a young man's pride, almost didn't go. Went because his mother told him to. "Go on, son, after what they did to you." "That's exactly why." She straightened his collar. "You know what payback is worth having. It's our life, moving on right in front of them. Everything else is just noise." The Piney Ridge station turned into a different place. First came the wall. Wallace Doyle got a paintbrush and a can of black paint and wrote in big letters on the inside of the washroom door the 5 rules of Miss Alice, one under the other, the way he remembered them from the old dairy: warm water first, hot soap and a scrub brush. Acid once a week, rinse till the water runs clear. Take the elbow apart and leave it open to dry. And underneath, in heavier strokes, the line her mother used to say, "What sleeps wet and shut, wakes up spoiled." Then came the brushes. The old man made the handles himself out of hickory, sanded smooth by hand, and gave one to every woman on the crew, and on each handle, near the tip, he cut 3 notches with a nail. "That's a house signature," he'd explain, and not say much more. "A tool with an owner gets taken better care of." Judy cried when she got hers. And then came the log. It stayed pinned to the wall on a bent nail, and at the end of every wash, whoever did it wrote down what they'd done and signed underneath. After. Always after. One time a young man came up from the plant office with a folder and said that wasn't standard, that the proper thing was to file it away in a binder back at the office. Adeline didn't argue with the boy, just asked him one thing. "And on the wall, who reads it?" "Mum, on the wall Tate Combs reads it when he brings his milk in. Loretta Shaw reads it. The boy who drives the truck reads it. In your folder, who reads it?" "You do, I suppose." She pinned the sheet right back on its nail. "Paper filed away in a folder is what nearly broke me in this valley, mister. Up here we hang it up." The young man wrote something down on his notepad and didn't push it further. 2 collections later, Sunridge Markets agreed to take a trial shipment. Those were strange days, everybody asking, nobody talking loud, the whole valley waiting on word from a shelf hours away. It didn't bloat. Not one piece. Not that shipment. Not the next. Not the one after that. The plant's lab man sent word that the numbers on Piney Ridge milk had improved so much he figured they'd switched suppliers on the chemical. Harlan came up the mountain to tell them himself. He got there late afternoon, car dusty from the road, and found the building sitting with its doors thrown wide, taken all the way apart, the pipe fittings laid out on the bench, a new gasket shining in a bowl of water, the crew scrubbing away. He stood in the doorway looking at it. "This is a fine sight," he said. Adeline was half inside the tank. "What's fine about it?" "A building sleeping with its mouth open." Marley showed up at the station sometime later, riding the same bicycle, the same shame written on her face as the first time. She stood outside by the fence post until Adeline came out. "I came to see if there's work." "Work doing what, honey?" "Anything. I can write. I can do figures." She looked at the ground. "It's all right if you don't want me." Adeline dried her hands on her apron and took a while before answering. "You got work here?" "Yes." Marley lifted her head. "You're going to write the log with me at the end of every wash, and you're going to do this." Adeline spoke slow so there'd be no confusion. "You write down what you saw, only what you saw with your own eyes at the time it happened. Never what anybody tells you to write, not mine, not the owner's, not anybody's." "Yes, ma'am." "And if somebody ever asks you to sign a thing before it happens, you get up and walk off the job, even if it's my job." "Yes, ma'am." That's how the daughter of the man who'd broken her name ended up writing every night under whatever Adeline washed. The valley talked about it, talked plenty at first, then got tired of talking, which is what the valley always eventually does. Hank Pruitt didn't fall apart all at once. A man like that never does, and whoever waits for the thunderclap ends up waiting a long time. First came the word, not the pretty kind, the other kind, the kind that travels gate to gate and beats the truck there. Within 2 weeks, the farmers on the far side of the ridge asked to have the elbow joint on their line opened in front of them. They opened it. It was the same as Piney Ridge. That contract fell through. Then the small meat locker in town went, because the owner, no saint himself, understood right away the size of the risk he was carrying. Then the candy plant let him go. He sold 1 van, kept the other, let 2 men go. Sometime after that, he sold the 2nd van too, and started doing cleaning work solo, with a wheelbarrow and 2 jugs, at a corner store and a party hall in town. Nobody stoned that man. Nobody spat when he walked by. The valley did to him the hardest thing a valley knows how to do, which is keep greeting him from a distance with a nod and never invite him in again. It was on a foggy morning that he showed up at the gate of the Piney Ridge station. He was in a clean shirt, same as always, except the shirt hung loose on him now. He stood outside, hat in his hand, a thing nobody had ever seen that man do in his life. Adeline was out in the yard, sleeves rolled up. "Morning, Mr. Pruitt." "Morning." The 2 of them stood there a while. "The corner store in town asked me for a thing," he said finally. "Asked me to open the line on their cooler every week in front of the owner." "Did you open it?" "I don't know how." He said it, looking at the ground. "I never opened a pipe in my life, Miss Adeline. Sold cleaning services 20 years, and I never once opened a pipe." The whole yard had gone still. Judy stood in the washroom doorway. Cleo stood with a bucket in her hand. Marley stood inside, not moving. Adeline looked at that man a long moment. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Didn't say any of the 40 things she'd rehearsed lying awake at night during the time she couldn't sleep. "Come on in." He came in. She took the wrench off the nail on the wall, the wrench that lived there in plain sight for anybody to see, and put it in his hand. "Fit it to the nut, turn it toward you, with your body, not your arm." And she taught him. Taught him to break the union loose, pull the gasket, scrub the inside against the steel wall, hold it up to the light, run the white rag through, and check the rag. Taught him the rinse rule and the cup test. Taught him to run his finger down the steel and listen. Hank Pruitt ran his finger inside a clean pipe for the first time in his life, and his hand stopped in mid-air when it sang. Marley looked across the building at her father. He looked back. Neither one said a word. There was no hug, no crying, no forgiveness said out loud. Just a father who lowered his head and a daughter who went back to writing. On his way out, Adeline handed him a long-handled brush. New handle. No notches cut yet. "This one's yours. What do I owe you?" "Nothing, Mr. Pruitt. This isn't something you sell." He put his hat back on, tucked the brush under his arm, and walked off down Miller's Gap Road on foot. Harlan Mercer came back up that mountain plenty of times after that, stopped calling ahead, and started just showing up. Learned to arrive early, learned to drink coffee in the station kitchen, learned to take his jacket off before he ever walked into the washroom. He did what he'd promised. Pickup by pickup, the docked money made its way back to the whole valley, and when the list was finally done, he had it pinned right next to the wash log, every name on it crossed off. He offered Adeline money 3 separate times. 3 separate times she said no. The 3rd time she added, "Why? You want to pay for my shame, mister, and that's not for sale." "If you want to give me something," she told him, "give something that'll still be here for whoever comes after me." That's how the Piney Ridge station ended up with a deep sink, a proper water heater, and a good light hung over the wash bench, so no woman up in that valley would ever again have to scrub a tank in the dark, hauling hot water in from a bucket. And that's how, before long, the company started sending Adeline out to other stations across the region. She'd ride out in a company pickup with the old wrench box from Fortner's Dairy in the back seat and spend 3 days at each place, teaching Miss Alice's rules to people she'd never laid eyes on before. Nobody ever had to say out loud that she was the master of the wash. The name stuck on its own, the way true things do. On one of those visits, late in the day, Harlan sat down on the step of the building while she packed up her things. "Miss Adeline, there's a question I never asked." "Ask it." "Why'd you stop that day?" 3 cars had already passed me. One of them belonged to your own station, one to the very company that was supposed to be cleaning it. You were headed to work with a schedule to keep, and you stopped for a man you'd never laid eyes on. She set the bucket down slow. Because I was the car once. How do you mean? Long time back, I walked down that same road in the rain, carrying Simon when he was little, running a fever. I needed to get him to town. I counted the cars that passed me by that day. 7. Harlan didn't say anything. The 8th wasn't a car. It was a man on a wagon hauling a load of wet firewood, who stopped, pulled the tarp off his load, sat me and the baby up on top, and carried us into town slow, mule sliding the whole way down that grade. She shrugged. Never learned that man's name. Never saw him again in my life. And you never forgot him. I made myself a promise that day, mister, that I'd never be one of the 7. The sun was going down behind the ridge, and the mountain went that color it goes when the day ends someplace high up. You weren't the first person I ever pulled out of the mud, she said, standing up. You were just the best-dressed one. Harlan laughed with his whole face, the way he'd laughed exactly once in his life, standing in the middle of a dirt road with mud to his elbows. Some afternoons later, Wallace Doyle asked her to walk with him down to the creek. They went slow on account of his leg. Old man Fortner's dairy building still stood there, roof caved in on one side, brush climbing up the wall, door hanging half off its hinge. They went inside. It was dark and smelled of old dust. The tank still sat in its place, lid gone. The line ran up the wall, rusted on the outside. Run your finger on it, the old man said. Mr. Wallace, this thing's been sitting untouched for years. Run it. She ran her finger down the pipe and it sang. She stood there with her hand on the cold steel, not quite understanding, and turned back to look at him. How's that possible? Because the last thing your mother did in this building, the very last night before the old man shut the doors for good, was take the whole line apart and leave it open to dry. She bit back at the fence. He knocked a knuckle against the pipe. She knew nobody was ever coming back. Left it open anyway. He pointed at the bench. It sat there, dripping all that night. Then the old man locked the door, and nobody ever walked in again till today. Adeline stood in the middle of that empty building, hand on the cold steel of a pipe her own mother had washed, when she herself was still a barefoot little girl, and cried without a sound, not from sadness, from company. It was Wallace, standing across the room, who finally spoke, his voice gone rough. Some folks leave you an inheritance. Your mother left you a rule. Rules outlast money. Back at the house up on the rise, the shingles over Simon's room got replaced before the fall rains came. 14 shingles and a piece of framing, paid for with her own wages, counted out on the kitchen table, owed to nobody. Tate Combs came up with the ladder. Bo Combs brought the mortar. Simon climbed the roof himself while Adeline stood below hollering at him to step on the rafters and not the tin, the way mothers holler. And when it was done, she went into her son's room, looked up at the dry ceiling, and stood there a while by herself, hand on the doorframe. The boy who slept under that roof wasn't the son of the woman who signed anymore. He was the young man who ran the hose out on Abe's truck every week and checked it in front of the old driver with a white rag in his hand. As for Miller's Gap Road, it stayed Miller's Gap Road. The company sent up a load of gravel and a grader to fix the worst stretch, and it helped. But dirt is dirt. When it storms for real, that patch still gives, except now there's something there. Leaning against the fence post, right at the spot where a suit-and-tie man's car once sank up to the axle, sit 2 planks and a pile of dry branches. Nobody ever moves them. Whoever uses them puts them back. Whoever breaks one brings another. It turned into a custom, the way customs get born in places like that without anybody ever deciding it out loud. Some time after, a traveling salesman got stuck in that same spot, late in the day, gunning his engine until he dug himself a hole where there hadn't been one. It was a boy from the valley who showed up at the fence, told the man to ease off the gas, let some air out of his tires, wedged in the planks, packed in the dry brush. The car climbed out easy, the way a car does when there's something solid waiting under the wheel. The salesman asked whose boards those were. The boy just shrugged, the way the whole valley had learned to answer, without quite being able to explain anymore where the custom had come from. They belong to whoever stops. And he stood there at the edge of the road, watching the car disappear around the bend, hands on his hips, mud up to his knees, because in that valley, after everything that had happened, nobody had it in them anymore to drive on past somebody stuck in the mud. Muscle never pulled anybody out of a mud hole. It's the one who stops that gets you free. If this story got to you, if you found yourself rooting for Adeline the whole way through, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the mud hole? Was it the signature? Was it that pipe coming open in front of the whole valley? Hit like if you want more stories like this one, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because there's a lot more where this came from. See you in the next one.